to start thinking about planting. We had a taste of spring the other day, and then winter cruelly came back and you know, froze over Binghamton again, but it's not too long until you can get your hands in the ground and start planting your garden. So I'm happy to help y'all get started with that this year. Today's workshop is really geared toward folks who are starting from scratch. But if you have a little bit of experience already, you're certainly still going to learn things. Christina was referring to a packet that you would have gotten by email that has a copy of the PowerPoint slides and then some other materials in it. So I would recommend having that handy for yourselves tonight. And if you have a pencil or a pen nearby, there is going to be some time today where we're going to let you start sketching out your garden bed. So you could start making a plan for yourselves and doing something like this. Okay. So that way you walk away tonight with an actual plan for what you're going to do this spring. And I started that just a few minutes ago, just to have an example for you all. And I realized, oh, well, I've got some things I need to start doing, and I could actually start my spinach and my peas before too long. So it was a good exercise for me right now to start thinking about my garden and getting ready for the year. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Bring up our PowerPoint. All right, so please do feel free to stop me with questions as we go. That's totally fine, as long as we're on track with time. Questions as we go is great. So this is the first educational workshop of our series, and we're going to have a lot more to come. I know that Christina will have the links for our registering for more workshops in the chats. But I want to put out a plug for our community gardens. So some of you may already be members of our community gardens. Some may be looking for a spot to grow your veggies for the year. So Vines has 19 community gardens around Binghamton, outside of the city, in JC, Endwell, Hillcrest, Port Dick as well, and Vestal. And they are now open for registration. So we encourage you to go to our website and see if there's a location near you with a bed available. And if a community garden doesn't work for you and you're looking to grow at home, we also have a Build a Garden program where we can build raised beds for people in their backyards or provide portable garden bags for a limited number of people. But this is a good option for folks who are definitely going to be growing at home but can't afford to build a raised bed for themselves. And we'll talk more about why raised beds are really important. Now, Christina already went over the housekeeping, so I'm going to skip over this, but you can see she mentioned down at the bottom of your screen, there's a spot to either mute yourself or join with video if you have issues. That's what it looks like. All right, so the first half of our workshop tonight, I'm just going to give you a lot of information and tips. And the second half, we're going to spend some time planning out your garden. So if you haven't gotten your writing utensils handy yet, start looking for those. So when you want to start a garden and you haven't done one before, you have some options. You can grow in raised beds. That's where you build some kind of structure up above the ground and put in some new soil. You could build that with lumber, with cement blocks, all kinds of different things. I mentioned our community gardens. You can rent a garden bed from Vines, or if you're not in the Binghamton area, there are other community garden organizations all around the country that you might look into. You can grow in containers, whether that's, terracotta pots, 5-gallon buckets from the hardware store, or garden bags, which are really nice, handy container that are light. They pack up to nothing when you're not growing in them. And they also breathe, which is much better for the root system. You can grow right in the ground, of course, but you're going to really want to consider some things before you go and do that. So one thing to consider is what's in your soil. So those of us who live in a city, or even Johnson City, Endicott, we built out our area really early, well before lead was banned from paint. And so the legacy of being an older city is that we have a lot of lead in our soil. And you might think like, oh, it's probably not a big deal. Get your soil tested. Don't just ignore that, because you'll be surprised what you might find. At my first home on the north side of Binghamton, I found levels of around 1,200 parts per million, which is very dangerous to grow in. So you want to be really careful. We do have some funds available to help with lead testing. If you need some help this season, get in touch with us. We can help you figure that out. But UMass Amherst, they have a soil testing lab. You can get a soil test for $9 plus the shipping, but it's well worth getting your soil tested. So it looks like the majority of folks today are going to be gardening at a community garden, some at home in containers, raised beds at home directly in the ground. For those of you who are going to use containers, we will have another workshop coming up on container gardening using garden bags. So take a look at that. We have some materials specifically on how to plant those, what kind of growing mix you want to put in them. So we'll get you that information if you're interested. Okay.
Amelia, do you launch the poll asking participants about where they're gardening?
Sure, go for it. Oh, you said just you want me to close it? Sorry.
No, you can stay there. So folks, if you see something that shows up on your screen,
okay,
that asks you where do you plan on gardening this year?
It did already pop up. Okay, so so Christina, but if you could put a link in the chat to our resources from Build a Garden for garden bags, I think that'd be helpful for people who are going to do container gardening. All right, so say you've tested your soil, you know that it's safe to grow in your backyard, or you're going to install your garden bed or containers. You want to figure out where in your backyard to put them. And you want to find a spot that has at least 6 hours of full sun per day. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to figure that out. But this is really important. If you have less than 6 hours of full sun per day, you're not going to be able to grow tomatoes or other really heat-loving crops like peppers. Most plants are going to need at least 6 hours of full sun per day. Another thing to consider is, where is your water access? You don't want to have to be carrying containers of water from your house out to your garden every day. So if you have an outdoor spigot, you want that to be, your garden bed to be close enough to that spigot where you can use a hose. If it's 200 feet away and you've got to deal with 200 feet of hose, like that's just kind of a nightmare. And when the summer gets busy, you're gonna neglect your garden bed. So make it easy for yourself. And then other things to consider are pests and disease. So do you have deer? Do you have woodchucks? And if so, you have to start thinking about how you're going to deal with them. So here are some examples of just different growing options. Up in the left-hand corner, we've got garden beds at our Laurel Ave community garden. You can see on the bottom, people growing using 5-gallon buckets to grow tomatoes and eggplants. And then up on the top right, somebody's got a great garden going, but they have deer, so they have a very nice tall deer fence so that the deer don't eat all of the food. It shouldn't be a deer buffet. It should be a garden for you and your family. But if you do have deer, you're going to need to put in an 8-foot fence minimum. If that's not something that's in your budget or something that you want to have to do yourself, digging all those holes, I recommend, seeing if there is a community garden that you could get to, so you could, not have to worry about that for now. And if someday down the line it makes sense and you want to have put in that deer fence, you can do it. All right, so other important things to think about when you're getting started. What grows in New York? So you're going to want to look and see what USDA hardiness zone you're in. Binghamton, we're in 5B. The further north you go, or south, your zone is changing. We're in a valley, so we actually have a milder growing zone in Binghamton than in the hills of the southern tier. Not too far from us. It does change. It gets a little colder. And our average last frost date is in early May, and then the first in early October. So this determines how much time you have to grow crops and get them to produce the fruit or whatever it is you're looking for them to produce. If a plant is going to take more than that amount of time to grow from seed to finished crop, then you're going to be looking at starting with transplants that you're either going to buy or going to start indoors early so that you can give them that head start. But for most of us, we're looking at, getting the majority of our garden in May, with some exceptions. There's some things you can plant before May in our area. But get your seeds early. This year, last year, there's been a huge run on seeds. Some commercial suppliers are even halting sales to home gardeners because there's been so much demand for seeds because of the pandemic. We're all, bored out of our minds and also, scared about our food supply. And so to make sure that commercial growers have seed available, some seed companies are limiting sales to the rest of us. So, if you can't find certain seeds, do reach out to us, or if you have financially, it's hard to buy seeds. We do have a limited stock of seeds that we get donated from seed companies that we can offer to our gardeners. This might seem really obvious, but only plant what you want to eat. There are some things that are really easy to grow and are fun, but if you're not going to eat it, if your family's not going to eat it, don't bother, and then I think this is super key. Start small. So I highly recommend to folks, when you are new to gardening, plant a very small variety of different crops. Start with maybe 4 different things and get that under your belt, and then try something new the next year. And, set yourself up for success by limiting how much you need to learn that first year. And then, of course, your fertility and compost, those are very important things. So if you are going to grow on the ground in your backyard and you have very clay heavy soil, you're going to have a very hard time getting your plants to be healthy. This is particularly a challenge in the hills around Binghamton. There's a lot of clay when you go up into the hills. And so you may have to put in a raised bed simply because of that. But each year you garden, you're taking nutrients out of the soil and they're building plants. So you're taking some of the nutrients out of that soil and you have to find a way to replace it. So something that goes hand in hand with home gardening is composting. And we are going to have workshops on composting. It's very simple to do at home. And this is going to allow you to return some nutrient matter to your garden so that it will be successful every year. And you do not need to use pesticides or spend a lot of money on amendments that you put into your garden bed if you really focus on putting compost back into the garden. Okay, so now we're going to go right into a technique, a method that we like to use for beginning gardeners called the square foot gardening method. It's a super easy way to start. You're going to be able to maximize your production in a small area. This is really ideal for raised beds. And you are going to have you're going to have very little weeding to do. Once your plants get established, they will be spaced out perfectly so that weeds are not going to have the space to get started. They won't get enough sun to outcompete your crops. So I love square foot gardening and so much because I don't have to weed past, say, June, July, if I do it right. So the idea with square foot gardening is that you take your raised bed and you literally make a grid out of it, making 1 foot squares. And then you're going to use these materials that we've provided to you to figure out how many plants you put per square. This takes a lot of the guesswork out of things, because how many of us know how big a tomato plant gets, right? Once it grows big. So you bring it home from Agway and it's this big. And so you plant, 10 of them right next to each other and they look like they've got plenty of space. And then all of a sudden they're, this big around and they're crowding each other. And like, you're like, oh God, I don't even know what to do with these at this point. I can't get them in a tomato cage. I can't trellis them. They're just like all like tangled up. So don't go into a blind. Use the square foot gardening method and you'll easily be able to know how to space things out without a lot of work. And then you're going to avoid those kinds of problems. So what you do is you figure out what you want to plant, you make your grid, and then you use the guide to determine how many plants go in per square. That tells you how many plants you need to buy if you're buying transplants, how many seedlings you need to start if you're starting them indoors, or about how many packets of seeds you're going to need. And it also helps you think about, like, what does my family eat the most, right? This is a very visual method of planning your garden, and you're going to look at it and you're going to be able to see, like, what am I going to get a lot of? Is that going to work? Like, can we go through that? If my family's not eating it, do I know how to store it? So this is a great starting point to think through all the logistics and the realities of your garden. So here's that example, right? The visual of how big a tomato plant gets. It gets to about 3 feet in diameter. And it starts off at 5 inches, right? So that's huge. So you have to really make sure you've got the right amount of space for it. All right, so when you're planning your garden also, you want to figure out what side of your bed is the north side. And the reason being is that the sun comes from the south, as you can see in this picture. And if you have tall plants on the south side of your bed, they're going to shade the plants behind it. So here's your tomato plant. If the sun's coming from up over here where my little office plant is, these plants are shading out anything here, okay? And your tomatoes want the most sun, but they're really tall and they're going to shade everything else out. So, throw your green beans or other short crops on the other side of your tomatoes. And then if you're adding a trellis, right, if you don't have enough tomatoes to go all the way across that side of your bed, put other plants that need something to support them, some kind of trellis to help them climb up, right? You can put them all in one line and then keep everything tall in the back of your bed. In your packet, there's a planning chart that looks like this. What I recommend is, if you have never planted a garden, or even if you have before, start sketching out just on paper, just a list of what you might want to try to grow. You might find yourself in a situation where you have listed a whole lot of things, and then you're going to realize you don't have enough space for it all. So it's a good way to start sketching it out and then reflect back and think, okay, if I've got to cut something, what's the most important thing for me? Something I think about when I'm planning what I'm going to plant is what gets me the best value, what I can grow easily, and what we eat the most of. So my kids love peppers, but pepper plants take forever to grow and produce. They're a little bit tricky. I never seem to have great success with them. And so they're not that easy. We go through a ton of them. I can't produce enough to meet what my kids want to eat, but I can grow green beans really easily. My kids love them. If there's extras, I can freeze them really easily just by blanching them really quick in boiling water and then putting them on ice. So, so for me, that's a no-brainer, right? Onions, they're really cheap to buy at the store. They take up a lot of space in your garden bed, and they're a long season crop. So for your $1, you're better off getting your onions from the store than trying to grow them at home. Tomatoes, we all know, like, there's nothing like a fresh tomato from your garden bed. Really good tomatoes are expensive, and they're not that hard to grow. So that's also, like, to me, that's a no-brainer. That's why everybody wants to grow tomatoes, right? Is that's a good kind of bang for your buck in terms of, what it costs to produce versus what it costs to buy at the store, a good fresh tomato. Okay, so you made your list, and you're going to then start looking into what it takes to grow those crops. And you're going to look to the seed information chart and other materials we've provided you. And you're going to look here to start seeing how much space do these plants need. You're going to think about, do I have seeds on hand already? If I do, are they still good? Are they going to germinate? Are they old? This has information to help you figure out if your seeds are too old to use. Do they need that full sun? Can they do with a little bit less? And then there's a lot of information in here. And basically, I recommend you just start looking for the information you need to know, and eventually more of this information, the more experience you get, is going to be easier to understand and make more sense. So things like this ideal soil temperature, that's really valuable to know when you can plant your seeds, right? So you can plant parsley when the temperature of the soil is only 50 degrees. So you can get that in the ground much sooner than you can get beans, which the soil temperature has to be up to 70. So you think about that, obviously that means, if the soil temperature's got to be around 70 degrees, you're not getting that in May, right? Because the temperature in the air is not 70 degrees yet. So you're not planting your green beans until June, right? But you could plant your parsley in April, May. So lots of information in here. You're going to learn something new every single year. There's lots of information on seed packets as well. This diagram helps you decipher what some of that information means. I'm not going to go through all of this now, but what I will say is things like tomatoes and things that take a long season to grow, don't buy the seeds. If you're not ready for it, don't buy the seeds. Don't try to do that from scratch. Get the plants either at, Agway or another nursery, or we also get a ton of tomato plants donated to us that we then provide to our community gardeners and other members of our programs for free.
Hey, Amelia.
Yes.
We have a chart specific question from the slide before this one. Do you want us to wait until the very end, or do you want to refer to it?
No, go for it.
near us. The
Go
question,
for it.
and I'm just going to model for our interns. So the question is from Andrea Pelmeri, and she's asking, what do the hardiness letters mean? I think that's in the fourth column of that chart.
I think I'd have to look at the full chart, because this is just, took like a little snapshot of the chart. Let me see if I can. Now I'll just hold this up. So in your packet, you'll see the full page, and there's stuff cut off. The labels cut off at the bottom. So essentially very tender, moderately hardy, very hardy. So if it's tender, it means that it's not going to deal with the cold very well, which makes sense, right? That kind of goes hand in hand with the ideal soil temperature. Very hardy things, you know, there's that also goes together. Interestingly, there are some exceptions to the rule, like melons can survive a frost, I guess, if you cover them. I've never tried to do that, but hopefully you're not getting a frost in August when your melons are in the ground, but every so often that happens. I remember I grew up in the Syracuse area and it snowed in August once, so you never know what's going to happen. So, all right. So mapping it out. So you've got your planning chart, you figured out what plants you want to grow, when you're going to plant them. That's what, after you start narrowing it down, you've identified exactly what you're going to grow, you're going to start filling in this information. When do you want to plant it? How much space does it take? Is it tall? Does it need full sun? And then this allows you to create your garden plan for the season, and also then, put stuff on your calendar so you remember when you're supposed to do things for the year. Okay. So then you're going to start planning out your garden bed by sketching it out on a grid. Oh, I wonder if something got slightly out of order, because I would normally then go over this chart. I think something is missing, but that's okay. So this is an example, is a sample bed that you might even just use, right? You could just take this and not have to draw out your own and say, okay, I'm going to use this as a model. I'm going to pick, from this list of things on the side that I want to grow in these squares. And I'm just going to make it really easy for myself. That's totally great. You can definitely do that. We've also provided in your packet a raised bed grid, so you could create your own and map it out yourself, because maybe you have a different size grid you're working with, right? So at the end of this workshop, that's what you're going to be doing. I do have some more details and info to provide for you. All right, I mentioned some things you're going to want to just buy seedlings and not try to start from seed yourself. A general rule, this is not hard and fast, but the general rule is that plants that produce a fruit, and tomatoes, yes, biologically they're a fruit, you're going to want to purchase seedlings for them, because fruiting crops have longer seasons. So that's a good rule of thumb. Things like leafy greens, you can just plant from seed. And then also things that are root crops and beans, you can plant yourself directly in the soil as seeds as well. Most root crops like carrots, beets, once they're planted, they don't like to be disturbed. Okay, they've got a long taproot. If you mess that up, the plant dies. Okay, so we have a chart for you that maps it out a little bit. So things that are definitely direct seed: beans, peas, a bunch of different kinds of greens, things with tap roots, transplant only. So you're going to buy a seedling, or you're going to get a seedling from us. Those you will plant as little baby plants. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, melons, and pumpkins. There are some things that you could do either direct seed or transplant, but it just kind of depends on your experience level. Do you have enough time in the growing season for them to get started? So things in the cabbage family, while you can direct seed them, some of them you might want to start with a seedling to give them a head start, and herbs as well. In the city in particular, cabbage family crops are really heavily affected by flea beetles. Flea beetles are super common in the city. And if you try to plant a kale plant from seed in the city of Binghamton in your garden, it's going to come up and it's going to look cute and happy and healthy. And then the flea beetles are going to turn it into lace like the next day. So even your seedlings might sometimes have trouble with those. So I do recommend getting seedlings, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you're also going to want to do some companion planting to help with flea beetles in particular. All right, once you get to planting, you're going to take this conceptual square grid that you've made on paper, and you're going to put it on your bed to make it easier, because I don't know about you guys, but I can't visualize a perfect square foot myself. Like I need something to help guide me in that. So I'm going to take a marker and I'm going to mark a foot down, measure down the length of my bed. And then I'm going to take a piece of string and I'm going to staple it, tack it, whatever, and make myself a grid. So then when I go to plant, I've got that square grid right there, and I can just follow the guide and I'm good to go. Don't forget to label your plants. When you direct seed, you're going to think, I will remember what's in this square. But how many times have you left the kitchen and wondered where you were going and what you were doing, right? Like, don't make it harder on yourself. Just label it, and then you won't have to guess later if you've planted it or not. After you plant your seedlings or your seeds, water the bed and keep watering it. Even if you're not seeing anything going on, keep that soil moist, not soaking wet, but keep it moist so that your plant babies have what they need to grow. And you're going to think, well, the plants aren't big yet, so I'm not going to put my trellis up yet, or I'm not going to put my tomato cage on yet. I'm going to wait for that. Don't wait, because like 2 weeks later, your tomatoes got gigantic and you can't get the tomato cage around it and you're breaking limbs trying to fit it around. So get your trellises and your tomato cages on right when you do your planting. Make it easy for yourself. There's lots of ways to trellis. This is my favorite way here on the left. It's called the Florida trellising method. You take garden stakes, you put them all along the side of your bed where you've got your climbers, and then you weave twine around them and give them, and just encapsulate them in that twine, and they will grow up along that twine. And then as they get bigger, you're just going to gradually sometimes tuck a branch into the center of the twine so it stays where it needs to be. But you can get creative and weave some sticks together, take a piece of scrap wire mesh, and make trellises a lot of different ways. Fencing. Fencing you also want to start thinking about from the very beginning. Even in the city, we have woodchucks. If you don't know you've got woodchucks in your neighborhood, the best way to find out is to plant a garden. And then you'll know if you have woodchucks. And probably it'll be too late at that point. We really like for raised beds, this green snow fence that you can get at Lowe's, or yeah, I haven't seen it at Home Depot. I get it at Lowe's. It's nice because it's flexible, so you can kind of bend it down to get into your bed, but it's not wire. Chicken wire, you bend it and then it stays bent, right? This plastic fencing, you bend it, you move back, it comes back up. And it holds up for a number of years. So I really like that. I recommend that to folks. If you do have woodchucks and you're growing in this kind of enclosure where you're growing right into ground, you need to bury your chicken wire under the ground. And a lot of folks have good success burying it not straight down like this. Sometimes people sometimes like to go out like that, so then you don't have to dig as deep. So the woodchuck, your fence is here, your garden's here, and you've buried the wire like this. The woodchuck's a couple feet out from your bed, from your garden, and they start digging and they hit the wire then and stop, right? If you bury it straight down, they're going to dig down, they're going to hit it, they're going to keep digging down until they get under it, and they're still going to go through. Deer, as I mentioned though, you got to go high for deer. They can jump 10 feet if they're really motivated. So you do have to go high for deer. These are just some last tips, I think. Let me see here. Yes. Oh, we're going to go back to the poll and see what people are saying. So biggest issues, woodchucks, groundhogs, some cats, the fencing that I use to keep out woodchucks also keeps out cats, and cats are a big one. They think that your raised bed looks like a nice litter box, and the soil's so nice and loose. So you want to definitely, if you got cats in your neighborhood, you need to put some fencing in, because not only do you not want their waste in where you're eating your food, where your food's coming from, but if you are direct seeding things, they're going to dig it up and then your seeds are gone, right? So it's really hard to direct seed if you have a cat getting into your bed and digging it up. I'm going to guess a lot of people have squirrels that can be pesky. Sometimes if you have squirrels and they just won't leave your bed alone, the best thing to do is to throw some mesh on top of your bed as well. They just won't stop. If anybody has any pest specific questions, feel free to throw them in the chat or ask. But some last tips, things that you direct seed, you are going to need to thin them. So you plant them a little bit thicker, right? Like you can see here, these are beets. You put in more seeds than you need, because for every one seed that grows, you might have one seed that doesn't grow. So you plant a little extra, but then, you wind up having more come up than is good for them to grow so closely together. So you need to take out the smaller ones and eventually space it to the proper spacing that it calls for in the square foot gardening method. You can take those greens, you can throw them in a salad, you can saute them. People love to take like their extra greens and throw them in with their eggs, right? That's an easy way to use up greens if you have them. Use succession planning for continuous harvest. I'm going to show you an example of this. So there are some plants you're going to plant and they will be done before the growing season is over. And then you will have all this other time that square foot in your garden bed could still be growing for you. So you'll want to plan for a second plant to take up that garden bed through the rest of the season. So we'll talk about that. When you're watering, water the base of the plants regularly. Don't water your leaves, especially your tomato plants. The more your leaves are wet, the more susceptible they are to fungus. So you may have heard of late blight. That's the big fungus that kills our tomatoes and gets their leaves turning all brown, rusty, crispy. If you keep those dry and you give them enough room to breathe by trellising them properly and pruning them, you're gonna be able to get through the growing season without late blight to the very possible last minute. Squash plants are also very susceptible to fungus, so you really want to make sure you're not watering those leaves. Companion planting. So I mentioned that flea beetles are really bad in the city. The good thing is that flea beetles hate marigolds. They don't like the smell of marigolds. So if you plant marigolds in your bed, you're going to get rid of flea beetles. And then you're also going to have some additional color in your bed, which is really nice. Radishes, apparently they also don't like radishes. I just plant marigolds because I think they're pretty and I don't like radishes. I just don't eat them. Like, I'm not a fan. So, you know, there is more information in your packet of companion planting options. Okay, so this is in your packet. So there's a lot to learn with gardening. Every year you're going to learn something new. Something's going to fail, and then you're going to have to figure out why it failed. And then the next year you know that, and it's going to get better and better and better. But this is a handy chart to address some of the pest issues you might find. So it's time to plan your garden. Yeah, question?
There was a question in the chat. Christine asked if she's going to make a raised bed, how should she use pressure treated or regular wood? How tall should that be, and what kind of dirt should she buy to fill that in?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have a tutorial, a design on our website for raised beds. I'm sure Christine is already on it and ready. Christina Zabaruka, and ready to put that link in our chat. So I recommend just use our design. It's for a 4 by 10 foot garden bed. It is using pressure treated lumber. Pressure treated lumber is no longer treated with arsenic. That was the reason that people were like, you can't use pressure treated lumber for raised beds. But arsenic was phased out close to 20 years ago, maybe even more at this point. So that's no longer an issue if you're getting new pressure treated lumber. You can also, if you want to avoid the chemicals altogether, you could use cedar. It is much more expensive, but it's fairly rot resistant. If you can get your hands on black locust lumber, that there are black locust posts farmers have been using for fences that outlive the farmers. So black locust is really hardy, but it's expensive, hard to get. So pressure treated is just fine. It will hold up for 10 to 15 years easily, even longer. I do recommend going up at least 16 inches. That's a good safe distance from the ground to give your plants plenty of rooting zone without worry about them getting into the soil underneath, and which if you have lead, you don't want that to happen. You don't need to put landscaping fabric between the bed and the existing soil. Some folks think that you have to. You don't. Lead only goes down because it only moves with water and gravity, and both of those go down. So you could put that in the weed fabric if you want, but it's really not necessary. I'm gonna bring this back up just as another reference, and I'm gonna show y'all the planning I did for my garden bed to help you visualize how you're doing this. So, like I said, in your packet, you have a raised bed grid that you can work off of, and you have this example and then more information on lots of other different plants and how much space they take up. So what we'll do now is I'm going to show you this example, and we're going to take lots of questions, but we can also just spend some time where people can start drawing this out and then find where they might have some questions that come up from that process, and we can help you with those questions. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. I'm going to share a different one. All right, let's see here. Hold on. Got a new little projector doodad, and he doesn't want to show up. So let's see. Might have to fuss with him a little bit. All right, well, he's being fussy. So we'll just do this a little.
Try clicking Apple S or Control S to switch the window that you're using for your video.
I don't have a Mac.
So the Control S, does that work for switch?
Control Tab, but it's just that it's not coming up as an option to share that screen within Zoom. That's what it is. So I'll try to just sharing my screen, but it's not. Let's see. Can folks see? Yeah, it's not happy. That's okay. We'll stop fussing with it and we'll just go with this. All right, so here is my spring garden bed, and I've labeled it with the year because, I mean, it might be nerdy, but it's not nerdy. I have a binder and I keep all of these each year because then I go back to it and try to, so I don't have to like reinvent the wheel, and I'll tweak this every year. So I save this. So you can see how I've outlined where I'm going to put my tomatoes, kale, parsley, and spinach. So I've prioritized the crops for me that we eat the most of, that give me the most value, and are also easy to grow. Because I don't actually have very much space to grow. I've started, we moved maybe 2 years ago. I don't even know. Last year was like 5 years, and it was no time at all at the same time, right? So I don't even know anymore. But I need to build another raised bed because I don't have that much space right now. So I only have this one raised bed in my backyard. So I've got to really make some tough choices about what we want to grow, because we want to grow everything, but we don't have the space for it. So I keep it to just a handful of things. We've got guinea pigs, so I grow a ton of parsley because that's what they get every morning and night. And spinach, because we could eat spinach like it's going out of style, and like that's expensive to buy at the grocery store. And then I have to have tomatoes. And kale, like kale's another one. Like I buy it at the grocery store and I'm so irritated at the price. It's the easiest thing in the world to grow. And they want to charge like $5 for a bunch of organic kale. And these kale plants that I put in, they're gonna grow from May into like December, right? But so this is my spring crops. The spinach is gonna be done in June. And in June, all that space is gonna be empty. The spinach hates the heat. So once you start getting into 80-degree temps, it's gonna go straight to seed. It's called bolting. So you're gonna see a stalk, it's gonna start growing stalk in the center. It's gonna grow a seed head, and then it tastes bitter and it's no good. So now I have my summer plan, and in place of the spinach, I'm putting green beans. But a trick I'll give you is that I'm not actually gonna plant all of these at once. I'm gonna plant like a couple of squares one week, and then a couple of squares the next week, a couple of squares the next week, and then so on. And then, because when these are ripe, they're all ripe at like the same, you don't want it all ripe at the same time, right? Because then you've got 50 pounds of green beans all at once. If you space it out when you plant them, then you're going to have green beans all the time. And by the time these guys are ready to harvest, these are done, I can take them out and plant some more. Green beans are like my favorite thing to put in the ground when I don't know what to put in the ground. And it's, June, July, August. If you have bare soil, put some green beans in because it'll grow. It's quick, it's easy, they're delicious, and you can preserve them really easily. So, and you might have 3 of these, right? You might, you know, get really creative and get really experienced and have 3 different plans. That's great, but you don't have to start complicated. You don't have to start with 2 even. Just start with 1, and that can get you through the season. And then if, you know, you have that empty patch, throw in something that grows real quick. Leaf lettuce is also a really good one. You can just sprinkle a bunch of lettuce seeds in, and you get baby lettuce, and you can cut it twice. You get 2 harvests out of it. Dig it up, plant some more. So there's some easy ones. So I see a lot going on in the chat box. So I want to go ahead and open it up to questions, and also at the same time allow people to start. If you want to start sketching stuff out, that's fine, and listen to other people's questions. Go for it. So feel free to unmute yourselves and throw questions out there. You don't have to put them in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Hi. So one of the things I was interested is the berry crops like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries. I notice you don't mention that at all. Do they not grow well in the raised beds, or do they?
Yeah, so I would say strawberries would be a good one to put in raised beds if you've got the space. The thing with strawberries is it's kind of one of those things that the amount that you might be able to grow at home may or may not make sense to you economically, right? Like if I only have 1 raised bed and I want to get enough strawberries to eat, I'm going to plant my tomatoes and stuff in the raised bed, and I'm going to go to the U-pick for my strawberries. So, because the amount that you can grow in 1 raised bed is not a huge amount. So that's kind of a judgment call. You can definitely plant them. They take a couple years to get established, right? So you're going to plant your plugs, and you're going to take, it's like what, 2 seasons? It'll be the next year they grow. Well, we'll have my mom teach this because I don't know why she's even here. Like she taught me everything. So like, I don't know why she thinks she needs this class, but.
Is that common, like berries? They take a couple years to establish. You just, not.
Yeah, so cane, like, so raspberries, blackberries, berries that grow on canes, some of them will fruit on the cane that grew last year, and some will fruit on a new cane. So that kind of depends, but I actually wouldn't plant your blackberries or raspberries in a raised bed. I would just put them in the ground. And one nice thing about, like if you do have like a minimal amount of lead in your soil, not enough to be super concerned, when you get a test, they'll tell you what range you're in and what you can or shouldn't do in that. The lead is less likely to get into the fruit crops. It's more taken up by leafy greens. So if you have a lot of lead, never plant leafy greens in lead contaminated soil. They've even tried to use like kale and collards and mustard greens as a phytoremediation. So you grow those to pull the lead out of the soil, and then you put those in the landfill. So those take it up really easily, but fruiting crops tend to not take up lead. So test your soil, but plant your berry crops like around the edge, like your blackberries, raspberries, around the edge of your property. That's a nice place to put them. And then you don't have to use your raised bed for those.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Christina, we're gonna have a class on fruit trees. Is he gonna cover berry bushes?
So he's focusing on the big 3. We're going to have Roger Ort from Ort Berry Farm. He's going to be focusing on strawberries, raspberries, and blackberries. That workshop is going to be free and open to the public, but it's not until November. So just stay posted. We have not put our summer and fall offerings on the Green Thumb webpage yet, but do save that date, November 3rd, 2021. You know, if you're excited about growing berries, you know, stay tuned with your community garden program. We do make seedlings available. A lot of the community gardens are sharing fruit seedlings as they're making divisions in the spring and in the fall. So if you're a member of a community garden or the Build a Garden program, that's a way to kind of find out the inside scoop to get some of these berry seedlings.
Yeah, last year we had a ton of strawberry plants donated to us. It's random what we get, but we had so many we almost couldn't get rid of them. So I see the question, what do you think are the easiest crops to grow? Easiest crops to grow, green beans. It's like I'm working for the green bean industry, but seriously, green beans are the easiest to grow. I would say herbs, basil, parsley. That's a great one to put in your home garden because getting fresh herbs, they're so expensive. And like, it's nice to just go in your backyard and get some fresh herbs and throw them into or go to your community garden bed, get some fresh herbs for your dinner that night. Like, it takes a super basic meal and turns it into something really wonderful, right? With just not a lot of effort. Tomatoes are also relatively easy to grow. You got to keep on top of watering them, but they can take a little bit of abuse. And then I know this is not everybody's favorite, but if you like beets, beets are super easy to grow. So are radishes, super easy. And lettuce, if you can keep on top of watering it, lettuce is an easy one as well. Okay. Another question. What does it mean? What does the spacing section of the chart mean? It says four are those 4 squares or a certain unit of measurement. Okay, the chart, when it says 1 square or 4 squares, it's 1 square foot. So this is 1 square foot. You can see the light colored lines. Those are 1 square foot. Okay. So it's 1 tomato plant within 4 squares. They take up a full 4 squares. But then your parsley in 1 square foot, you can plant 4 plants. Okay. Has anybody here never planted a garden? If I can see you, it's okay to raise your hand. Steve, this is brand new to you. Jamila, it's brand new to you. It's, you know, like, you're going to learn so much your first year and you're going to realize how wonderful and easy it is. So don't be scared. You have a question, Jamila?
I haven't planted at a community garden place, but I plant a garden in my backyard. But I think I was talking to you. The squirrels are very evil. They're very evil. So I had to put my bell pepper, my spinach, my tomatoes on my balcony. It was, and when I put it up there, it just started growing. And I was like, you squirrels, you're not getting my bell peppers no more.
I know one thing people do is make a spray with cayenne pepper. And then you spray the plants, but you have to like keep spraying them because every time it rains, it comes off. And then when you eat it, make sure to wash it, right? Unless you love cayenne pepper, that's fine.
I mean, we've got a gardener at Otsanengo who swears by wrapping some of her fruit plants in old stockings, like old nylon stockings. It's kind of like the poor man's exclusion netting for keeping some of these birds and squirrels out.
That's smart because it can the nylon will just expand as the fruit expands. I've seen people use old stockings for trellising things like watermelon, because you can trellis watermelon, believe it or not. You've got to have some really beefy stakes to hold it up, but then you need something to support the fruit, and so they'll put it in a stocking and then tie that stocking to the stake, and as the watermelon grows, the stocking just expands. That's smart.
But a good idea. There's a question here from Elliot Brodsky from the Deerfield Garden. He says, my beets last year were really tiny. Does the soil have to be looser? My potatoes also didn't make it.
Yeah, Elliot, could have been an issue of the soil being too compacted, but you guys had some nice new compost on the top of your beds last year. Did you thin your beets so they had enough space to get big? You did. Okay. Yeah, then
I thinned them, and when I let them go, and when I went to pull them, they were not like big round beets. They were like the size of golf balls after all season. And the potatoes, I mounded them, and the potatoes just never made it. So, and it took up too much space, so I'm not going to do that again.
that's a good one of those lessons learned, right? Like potatoes are fun to see grow, but they're so cheap to buy at the store or the farmer's market, and they take up so much of your bed.
Right. I'm not going to do that again. The peas, I did a lot of things. I can say that the baby kale, now, what about how early? Because kale, I put arugula in March or end of April or beginning of April, and the arugula I had all almost until December back, and I did a second crop. So aren't there cold weather leafy greens that you can put in earlier than May?
Yeah, you can put kale and collards in that early and it'll be fine. If you get a really hard frost and they're babies, you might want to cover them up just to protect them. Once they're fully grown, they'll live through a frost. They'll wilt. Like you'll get your frost in October, your kale plant will go droopy, and then it warms up and it perks back up. And it's just fine. And then it actually is super sweet. Elliot, thanks for bringing that up. Another really easy thing to grow are peas.
Right.
And that's a nice one to throw in early. You can throw them in actually in the next couple of weeks. They won't rot. They'll just wait for the soil to get warm enough to grow, and they'll grow when they want to grow.
Right.
And then come June, they're going to be done. Take them out, put something else in there. I like to I'll do something like I'll put in peas, and when I take them out, I'll put in cucumbers. Like I'll put in a variety of cucumbers, like a pickling cucumber or something that produces a small cucumber, because then you have enough growing season for those little guys to ripen.
Right.
If you wanted like those massive, like market more or whatever cucumbers, it might not be enough time, but my favorite cucumber to throw in after peas is called the Mexican sour gherkin. It's also called a mouse melon, and it's the cutest cucumber you've ever seen. Let me see if I can find it.
My biggest problem is that I didn't see the little gherkins, but that gherkin became the size of a watermelon. I didn't see it underneath the leaves. And so even though I was checking, all of a sudden that bigger cucumber can kind of zap the thing of everything else.
Yeah, you get a good rainfall and they just plump up like crazy. And let me show y'all, this is like just the cutest, most wonderful thing you could grow in your garden. This is your Mexican sour gherkin, or aka mouse melon. So here it is growing. These are about the size of your thumbnail. But they're super tasty. They're easy and quick to grow. And if you want something that just like brings you a little bit of joy because it's just so ridiculously cute, like we'll start some Mexican sour gherkins at the farm, so we'll have some seedlings to share with folks. Okay. Has anybody, I see some, it looks like maybe Lindsay is drawing out a garden bed. Is anybody else trying to sketch it out at this point? Oh, Jamil, you got something? Nice. If you're growing at a community garden and you're not sure of the size of your bed, we can probably get that information to you pretty easily. Yeah, Jamil.
I gotta write what's in the box. Oh, okay.
Oh,
And another thing,
that's just to help you plan it out, right? So once you've got a grid going, then you draw out what you want to put where. And that way you have a
okay.
plan for the year and you can figure out like, how much can I fit into this garden bed? And how much
Okay,
space
and,
do I need? for everything?
Okay. And another thing, sorry, you was talking about cayenne pepper. What is that for? Pest?
Yep. So it can help both keep animals out, but also insects. So
Get those little white little things and anything else?
it doesn't work for aphids. For aphids, soapy water works really well. But actually, what I like to do if I have some pests is I'll take cayenne pepper and I'll mix it up with a soapy water. Like I'll just put cayenne pepper in a spray bottle with soap and water, and then spray that. And the soapy water helps deal with aphids and things. The cayenne helps with animals, and then also flea beetles.
Oh, okay.
The flea beetles will hang out on the underside of your leaf. So you got your leaf and the top looks good, but you're seeing, well, you don't see any pests, like any insects on the top of the leaf, but you're starting to see holes. Look underneath it, turn that leaf over, and you're going to see little black dots.
Oh, so cayenne pepper. It's the cayenne pepper.
Cayenne
Wow.
pepper will help with flea beetles.
Because I had every pest that was on my porch, on my tomato plants and bell peppers.
Yeah.
Cayenne pepper. Wow. Okay, I remember that.
Yeah. And as you're going through the season, if this goes for everybody at one of our community gardens. If you're having pest issues, ask the site coordinator or ask Christina, and they'll help you figure out how to deal with it.
And if you have really deep,
I even
March 5th, we are going to have an integrated pest management workshop. You'll learn how to make your own insecticidal soap and trap if we get anxious. That's a good opportunity, a good workshop to sign up for if you're curious about pests.
May 5th.
May 5th.
May 5th. If anybody isn't already familiar, we started a simple text and email educational service this year called our cultivation calendar. So every Friday we send you some tips. So we're at this point of the year, we're sending out tips on planting your garden. When the growing season gets started, we'll be giving you reminders like now's the week to get in some peas. Don't forget to prune your tomatoes, things like that. And so we'll give you articles that address specific things that you need to be dealing with that, like in that moment, in that time of the growing season. And I'll let Christina throw up a link in the chat for cultivation calendar, but it's on our website. So Kira was asking, what's a gherkin? So a gherkin is just a type of cucumber, but that Mexican sour gherkin I was mentioning, it has a couple different names. It's a type of cucumber. Does anybody have a crop that you've tried to grow and had problems with?
I have a question. One of the biggest problems I had last year with my vegetable garden was getting pollinators. So I was wondering, can you plant like flowers in with your vegetables to kind of draw like bees and ladybugs and things in?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, I know my mom always put marigolds in our garden, right? Now that helps keep pests away, but it also, you know, is nice for pollinators. You can plant all kinds of things. Like you can easily throw things like cosmos in, you know, like they're really pretty. They don't take up a lot of space. They'll kind of just grow where there's space. And bees love cosmos. Throw them, you know, near your bed, around your bed. Definitely do that. And there are a lot of really good tips out there on the internet on things you can do to attract pollinators in your yard. One of the things that folks often don't think about is that some pollinators, you know, they like a lot of bees don't actually live in hives. They live in little, they have much different habitats, and you can get these bee boxes that you can put up in different spots around your property and they're really, you wouldn't even notice them. We used to have a bunch at the farm. I think we've had to move some around, but no one would ever notice that they're there. But they help give a space for bees to make homes. I think I don't have any right here, but we had some students from BOCES make some really cool insect motels. Hold on, I'll bring one over real quick. So this is a really fun thing. It's also really pretty and decorative. So they just made a little box and put a bunch of pine cones in. And then you can hang this up outside and it creates habitat for insects.
We have a question from Maria Eaton asking about zucchini and blossom end.
Okay, blossom end rot with zucchini. I've had that more of an issue with tomatoes. Christina, have you?
I feel like that happens just because of uneven watering and excess nitrogen, like too much fertilizer.
Yeah, with tomatoes, the culprit is typically uneven watering. So I'd imagine the same would go for squash. And then also for tomatoes is actually a lack of calcium.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be the same for zucchini. A nice solution for calcium is if you eat eggs, take the shells, mash them up, break them up, throw them in your garden bed. They're not going to give you an immediate infusion of calcium because they're in that shell form that takes time to break down. But over time, it's going to help balance out the calcium in your soil. And otherwise, what else are you doing with your eggshells? If you're really curious about the nutrient level in your soil, you can get your soil tested. You can do a soil test and they can do a nutrient analysis for you. So UMass Amherst, Cornell Cooperative Extension, they both have, like I mentioned, they can do lead tests for you. They can also look at the nutrient levels. And so that would be something to look at. With uneven watering is not just about like how often are you watering your bed, but how well is your bed retaining that water. So if you're having water drain straight out of your garden bed, put more compost in it, and also cover your soil, put a mulch on it. So you can get straw. Don't use hay. Hay has seeds in it. You want straw. You can use straw. You can use leaves, although leaves are going to give you more weeds, but you can use shredded paper and cover up that soil so the sun isn't beating down on it and then causing all the water to evaporate out. And then you don't have to weed as much. So if you get like You know, I like to buy a bag of chopped straw from Agway every couple of years. It lasts me a while. And I just put that down on the bed. For the community gardens, we wind up getting straw, so folks can get access to that.
Can I just say one thing about marigolds? Because I haven't figured out how to do the chat thing. They do have marigolds that don't have an odor, because people don't like the smell. So make sure you get marigolds that have an odor, because the odor is the thing that keeps the flea beetles and also rabbits away.
Very good point. Thank you. See, I told you, she's got all the information.
Stop. Can you stop?
All right.
Stop.
Does anybody have any other questions? We can stick around as long as people have questions. Otherwise, you know, we can close up for the night, but also, you know, shoot us questions. If you're struggling during the year, shoot us questions. We will have a couple more of this workshop. So if you want, you know, draw out your bed, start, you know, figuring stuff out, and come back to another workshop with any questions you might have. Also, we will have a lot of other workshops that dive deeper into specific topics. This is really meant to be just like get you started. But we will have much more in-depth workshops on other things. And like I mentioned, the cultivation calendar, we'll be sending out all kinds of tips throughout the growing season on what you could be doing in your garden, right? You know, during that time of the year. I think that will be really helpful to a lot of folks who are new. All right. I hope this was helpful for folks. It was really nice to see y'all and start thinking about spring and growing a garden. I know. I cannot wait. I just need the winter to end. All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you.
There is a feedback survey there. We do take feedback. We'll use your feedback to improve future programming. So you can complete the link that's in the chat box, or you can complete the link when you receive it in your email later this week.
All right. All right. Well, I think with that, we'll probably close out for the night. So I think we have to stop this to stop it recording on Facebook Live anyway, so we can't do any kind of debrief or whatever here tonight, unfortunately. But it's nice to see y'all.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Amelia.
Thank you.